Paine, Eyewitness to History, a special program of the Irving Archives and Museum. Miss Paine is now a California resident, but back in the early 1960s, she lived in Irving, Texas, in this home that is now a city museum. The young mother befriended Marina Oswald. She welcomed Marina and her husband, Lee Harvey Oswald, into her home. That's how she became connected with one of the most tragic and most talked about moments in presidential history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Over the next hour, you will hear her thoughts on Lee Harvey Oswald, and she will take audience questions. But she begins with some brief thoughts on her proudest moments in Irving as a teacher in Bear Creek.
Will the student of the Bear Creek Integrated School please stand up? Rex, where are you? There he is. He was smaller then. You were probably 4, and that was quite a long time ago. But it was the place where I felt most at home in terms of doing something constructive in Irving and being very interested in both the children and in the Montessori teaching method, which was very exciting. And I'm going to give just a little more background, too, before we get into the Oswald part, as to why I was interested in the language of Russian, why Russian, and as to how Michael Paine and I came to come to Texas. So just a little background. I was active with what was called the Young Friends Committee of North America. This is young Quakers, high school, college-age kids. And it was a Cold War era. We're talking the 50s. And we were trying to see what could we do to make people be nicer to each other across dividing lines of belief. And we wanted to do an exchange of young Quakers, young people from here to go to Russia and young Russians to come to the States. And we looked around to see, well, do we have some nice young people who speak Russian? Well, we found one. And I thought, well, maybe we need more people. We're told to speak to our enemies, right? Talk to our enemies and be friendly. And so I started to study Russian really intensively one summer. Michael Paine and I, we both loved folk dancing. And I was teaching at that time at a Quaker school in Philadelphia. And we fell in love. And then after, a couple of years went by, we were married, and a couple of years went by. I have to tell you that part of what's hard for me in doing this kind of talk is that it raises multiple grief. I really admired President Kennedy. It was so sad to see him killed. And also, why was Marina at my house? Well, because Michael and I had separated. The marriage just really wasn't working out. Very sad for me. And the two losses kind of intertwine in my spirit and my feelings about the loss of the dream of the marriage and the loss of the dream with President Kennedy, who dreamed for us so beautifully with the Peace Corps. And he's the one that made it possible for us to go to the moon and come back. That's been very much on the TV recently. Come on, boys, come back. So that's how come Marina was in my house, and it was very nice to have somebody to talk to. I was learning, it was helping me with Russian. You can't beat living with somebody who's a native speaker. That was wonderful for me. I first met Lee Oswald and Marina in February of 63. There was a party in Dallas, and Michael and I were invited, but he had a cold and didn't go. And I met Lee, who entertained people in the kitchen about his going to Russia and coming back. But I spent most of my time with Marina in the bedroom. She had a little baby. And I got the address and asked whether I could write her, and wrote and actually arranged to come and visit her at their place in Dallas. And did do that. They didn't have you have to realize what it was like to be poor and what it was like in 63. They didn't have a phone. And so I wrote a card and said, could I visit in such a time? And she wrote back and thanked me for remembering her from the party. And I arranged to go over and visited her there. And I discovered that she was expecting another baby. She had become pregnant. And she also said that Lee was talking about having her go back to the Soviet Union, which she certainly didn't want to do. So I sort of let her know that if she really wanted to stay, she could stay at my house if she wanted. But it was hard to arrange. I didn't know how Lee felt. I'm going to fill in a couple of things that I didn't know about until after the assassination. But you have to understand that Lee got his Russian rifle, or not Russian rifle, his rifle, and I have to look it up. March 20th, he got the rifle at his P.O. box. And then it was April 2nd that I went and visited, but it was April 10th, and all these guys know this, these students of the case, was that Oswald shot at Edwin Walker to try to kill him. And I asked Kevin to put this note in front of you because it seems to me so significant as to what was going on in Oswald's mind. He started out saying, come on, you all got it here. Here is the key to the post office box, which is located behind the main post office downtown. See, I didn't know about this note, but found out later, and I'll tell you when. But this is on April 10th when he went out to try to shoot General Walker. And then he ends up saying, I left you as much money as I could, $60 on the 2nd of the month, and you and Junie can live on $10 a week, which I think they did. And he says, if I'm alive and taken prisoner, the city jail is at the end of the bridge we always used to cross when we went to town, the very beginning of town, after the bridge. Well, that happened, and I had no clue, but Marina did. Of course, she found the note when he didn't come back as soon as she expected that evening. He'd gone out, she didn't know where. But when she got nervous and wondering where he was, she went and looked on his little desk and found this note. Fast forward to April 24th. That's not very much after the time that he tried to shoot Walker. I came over to visit, and Lee was all packed up to go somewhere. He had all his things and packaged, and he wanted to see if he could get a ride with me to the bus station, because he was going to go to New Orleans to see if he could get a job there and live there. And looking back, I privately suspect that maybe Marina wanted to get him out of town. They were still looking for whoever it was had fired a shot at Walker. They didn't know who had done it. And she was so terrified, I think. What's going to happen? What does it mean? So I said, yeah, I'll take him to the bus station. And he said he's going to buy a ticket for Marina. And I said, and then he would write her a letter, no phone, of course, write her a letter to say to come on down. He's got a place to stay. And I said, well, wait a minute. This is a young mother with a 1-year-old and pregnant, and all the equipment that goes with a 1-year-old, that's all going to go on the bus, and then she's going to go down to New Orleans. I said, well, we could make it easier. How about if I bring her up to my house for a while, and I have a phone. You could call and say when you have a place for her to stay, and I'll drive her down with or baby June. Well, he thought that was all right. So that's what we did, took him to the bus station. And then I packed Marina up to come to my house. And that was May 24th, I took him to the bus station. It was May 10th that I took her and June, and of course my two little kids, who went everywhere with me, to New Orleans. And we stayed that weekend. Not an easy weekend. There's a lot of strain in the relationship between Marina and Lee, and a lot of prickliness, I guess you could say. I never saw him hit her, although I heard later that he had. But they argued, they bickered. And that was pretty unpleasant for me. Anyway, so we came back after the weekend, and along comes the summertime, and you have to understand, I was not only lonely, I was bored. You don't get a lot of fascinating conversation from a 1-year-old and a 2.5-year-old who were my kids. So I packed into our station wagon. Pardon me, I think it's funny, which is now owned by this man right here. And taking good care of it. And we drove across country and stopping to see family, but mostly family in the Northeast and Philadelphia area. And then I went and visited some of the friends, the Quakers that I had worked with on the what's called the East-West Context Committee, the ones that were trying to talk to our enemies and improve relationships with Russia. And then on down to my sister's in Bethesda, I visited there. This was the weekend of the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King spoke so eloquently. And my sister had several little tiny kids, and I had my two kids, also tiny. I wanted to go, but I did not think a crowd like that was a good place to take very small children, so I didn't. We had to wave at it from a distance. Bethesda isn't far from where it was. But anyway, missed that. And then went on down, drove down to New Orleans to see Marina and Lee down there. On the way, I stopped at the church in Birmingham where those 4 little girls were killed to try to say how much I regretted that happened and to leave something for them and to say that, you know, there are people who appreciate who they are and would help them. And I felt like I could explain that to my kids, that this was an accident. They could see it, you know, the church was still injured, and you could say that they need help and to rebuild the church, and that what happened was terrible, and so we're blessing them and going on our way. And then I went down to New Orleans. Lee was again ready to go somewhere. And he said that he would be leaving the next day or so. But I determined that he really was comfortable with the idea of Marina coming and staying with me for a while. I was very concerned that he not feel he was being undercut as the father of the house and you know, with his family. And while he did require some financial assistance, it was his family. And he did feel okay about it. I was kind of appalled because she'd been there all summer. She by now was 8 months pregnant and had not had any medical attention or care, and they couldn't afford it. But they had lived long enough in Dallas County where I could get her in for free care to just check out how the pregnancy was going. And also, if the baby came, I could get her into the hospital and talk through all the paperwork and whatever was needed for that. So I think he was actually grateful for that. I felt that it was he felt good about it. And of course, he packed up our car. And looking back, I realized that one of the tall Marine Corps duffel bags that he put in the back of the station wagon probably had the rifle in it. But I did not know he had a rifle. And I'm sure he packed it to be sure that I wouldn't know. And then those things of theirs I put in our garage when we got back to Irving. So Marina and I were there in Irving, and then after a week or so, Lee came to Dallas, called on the phone, said he wanted to come out. Could I come and get him? Of course, he didn't drive, didn't have a car. And Marina answered the phone, talked to him, and she said, no, she can't do that. She just gave blood at Parkland for preparing for the baby. So, okay. I didn't say I would or wouldn't, but she said for me. And so he actually hitchhiked out, which worked well for him. He was small, slightly built, and very tidy, and looked okay. And the guy that picked him up took him right to the door. He said he was going to see his family after a separation, and whole long story. I didn't want him to stay at the house. Some of you have been to the house. You know how small it is. And we had a mother and two babies, two young children, me and two children in one bedroom, and Marina and her baby, and later by middle of October, a new baby in that bedroom. So I didn't want him to stay at the house, but I said he could come out weekends to visit with her. And a little story about how it came about that he worked at the school book depository. I was next door to the Roberts house. We have no Roberts actually here, do we? No. But Marina and I were over visiting, having coffee with our neighbors. And Linnie Mae Randall, who lived across the street, said that her brother worked at the Texas School Book Depository, and he had a lot of work. They were filling orders. This is October. Schools, districts are getting their books, and she thought there might be a job there. And you have to understand, Marina did not speak any English. She didn't understand a lot of English either. She didn't know what that conversation was about. So I explained it to her later, and she said, oh, could you call and see if they really do have an opening? And so I did, called and talked to personnel, asked for personnel, and got Roy Truly. And I said, well, this young man, a wife and a baby, young girl and a baby on the way, and he's looking for work. Was there an opening? And he wouldn't say, but he said, well, let the young man come by. So that's when Lee called on the telephone to talk to Marina, she told him that, and that he should go and see, which he did, and I guess he did all right as far as the interview was concerned. I learned today that he lied on the application. I didn't know that, but that's no real surprise. And got the job. And then arranged with Linnie Mae Randall's brother, I wish you were here, Fraser. Here? You're here! All right. Oh, hooray. Yule is here. Thank you. And arranged that he would be able to transport Oswald to work and back, because he was living with Linnie Mae. They had moved now to a house just down the street. And so that was a pretty good arrangement for all parties. He'd come out on Friday night and then go back with Buell on Monday morning. And I think probably it was a very relaxed setting for Oswald, that he really enjoyed seeing his wife and the now two babies, and was grateful to be able to come out. Then along comes the well, I didn't mention, the baby, Rachel, came on the 20th of October. And Lee had given us a phone number of a place to call if the baby came and let him know. And but we didn't use it because the baby came on a Sunday, and Lee was there at the house, and that was good because it was evening and my kids were in bed, and I needed to take Marina to the hospital, and he could babysit. He could stay with the kids while I took her to the hospital, which is what we did. And then it wasn't till quite a lot later I'll come back to this matter of the phone number that he had given us. So that weekend of Veterans Day weekend, it was Armistice Day, what used to be Armistice Day, was a 3-day weekend. And Marina asked him not to come out. She felt he had kind of overstayed his stay the previous weekend, which is when my daughter had a birthday party. But she was missing him, and she asked me to dial the number that we had to how to reach him. So I did, dialed the number, said, may I speak to Lee Oswald? And the lady said, there's no Lee Oswald here. And I said, was this number? Yes, it's that number. And I hung up in confusion. I didn't know what was going on. And Lee had a habit of calling Marina after work every day. And that next Monday then, that was Sunday night. And Monday afternoon, when he got home, he called her, or wherever he was, he called her. And she asked about, we tried to reach you by phone, and it was the wrong number or something. And he was furious. And I'm listening just to the side that Marina is saying. He said he was using an assumed name. She shouldn't have tried to reach him. And then she let him have it. And what are you doing playing these games? And what's going on? And they just had a pretty hot argument on the phone. And that was Monday before of the week of the assassination. So other than that, the week seemed normal. We were anticipating and eager to see President Kennedy. Very excited. Very excited. And we just, we hadn't had TV very long. But I watched TV when the president and his wife were due at a breakfast in Fort Worth that morning of the 22nd. We'll have to come back to that because I'm skipping over what happened Thursday night. We'll go to Thursday night and then to Friday morning. Thursday, when I came home from the grocery store about 5:30 in the evening, Lee was on the front lawn playing with June, his little daughter, and my kids. And I was very surprised to see him. He didn't normally come out on a Thursday. And Buell, you can tell me if this is true, that he asked for a ride on Thursday, saying he was going out to pick up some curtain rods. And that you asked whether he'd need a ride out on Friday. And what did he say?
He said no.
He what?
He said, I asked him, I said, will you be going home with me on Friday? And he said no.
He said no. Yeah, wouldn't need a ride on Friday out to the house. And later, of course, I learned that he brought with him a big, some wrapping paper that he got at the school book depository, that ultimately he wrapped up the rifle and took it off the next morning. But that all happened before I was up. He was, I got up about fairly early, like 7, but he was already gone, and left a coffee cup in the sink, so I saw he'd been there. And Buell can say he put a package in the back of the car. So anyway, so there I am, and that's now Friday morning, and watching the TV, and President and Mrs. Kennedy coming for breakfast in Fort Worth. They were a little late. As Kennedy joked later, it takes women a little longer to get dressed. And the newspaper, the reporter on the TV was kind of filling time while they were not yet arrived. And he mentioned the assassination of President McKinley. Now, how is it that was so much in the air in Dallas? People were worried about his safety. It just speaks to the fact that the air was laden with worry about the president's safety. And this newsman, I did find out, they confirmed that was indeed on the tape from that morning. So I had a dental appointment for my kid, older kid, and went off to take, both my kids go with me everywhere, and went off for that about 9 o'clock. But I left the TV on because I knew that when Marina got up, she would want to see what was going on. And she would be up sometime, she had a very little baby. She would be up nursing in the middle of the night, so if she could sleep a little later, she would, and I knew she would want to be able to sleep. But when she got up, I learned from her later that she was very pleased to see the TV on and to see what was going on. And then when I came back with my kid from the dental appointment, we sat there watching. And then we heard that the president had been shot. And, they didn't have TV cameras on the motorcade. TV was still quite new, and the camera's huge and heavy. But one of the newspaper person reporting on microphone said he saw a pink cloud rise for the president's head. I thought, oh my God, it's fatal. Oh my God. And I went and got a votive candle and lit it. Marina asked, was this a kind of way of praying? I said, yeah, it was. And then a little more than an hour later, we heard that in fact he had died. And wasn't all that much later, I guess, maybe mid-afternoon, when 6 police officers arrived at the door saying they had the Oswald in custody for shooting an officer. And we by now had heard that an officer had been shot. And I thought, oh, this is not good. And one of the officers asked, did Lee have a rifle? And I said no. And translated to Marina, who said yes, he did, and led the officers into the garage. And here was this blanket roll on the floor. And the officer picked it up, and you know how it's folded over his arm. And I thought, this is the moment when I felt it could have been late. And I was just devastated to think that. And at that point, I was ready to help these officers in whatever way I could, Later, we learned that Marina, she was the only one that knew about this note that he had left when he went out to try to kill somebody in April. But someone who interviewed her later told me that she had, when she heard that the shots had been fired from the school book depository, we were out hanging up diapers, and I went out to tell her that they said the shots had been fired from the depository. I didn't notice, but she went into the garage to look for the rifle, recognizing that it might be Lee. And she thought it was there, but it wasn't. So then comes a lot of activity at the police station and changes, and here's where the grief intertwines. Michael and I had been separated for a year at this point. But when he heard that the shots had been fired, heard on the radio, the shots had been fired from the school book depository, he drove over to the house to try to help to see what was going on. And so he was there and went with us and the police officers down to the police station. The officers were, many of these men here are really noble policemen doing their job, but this crowd of 6 was a mixed bag, I would say. A couple of them were very courteous and appropriate, but they didn't know who we were or what we were like. And they were wanting to rush us. Marina wanted to put on change of clothes. And they didn't want her off in a room by herself, no way. And so it was very stressful. You know, we were all just so stricken. And we did ultimately, well, one of the police officers said, "You better hurry up or we'll take the kids down to juvenile." And he grabbed me by the arm and pulled on me. And I looked to my little daughter and I said, "You can go with us." Like I was saying, "You can't intimidate me, man. This girl isn't, I'm holding her hand." And then we did, my son was sleeping. We went over and got, oh God, you can't imagine how naive I was. But here were the policemen, and I said, "Well, we need to get a babysitter to come stay with the kids while we go downtown," because, they were sleeping, bedtime. Afternoon. So I started to walk over toward the babysitters, and one of the officers came along. I said, "Oh, you don't have to go." Well, of course he had to go. That just shows how innocent I was. So we got the babysitter to come over and stay with the kids, but my daughter went with us. She almost remembers, not quite, that she had just had a 4th birthday. So, friends, we're going to get to the note now. The next day, well, that evening, at the police station, we met Marguerite Oswald. Very interesting lady. And she asked her if she could come out to my house. She lived in Fort Worth and had negotiated herself a ride to the police station in Dallas. And she asked if she could come out and stay at my house. And I said, "Well, if you can sleep on the sofa, you can come out." So that's what she did. But she also invited people from Life magazine, one a photographer and one a writer, to come out. And that's how come we have a picture that's on the front page of, somebody's going to lift it up. There's a book. Yeah, this is Tom Allen's book, Mrs. Paine's Garage. And this was done by the Life photographer. And we wouldn't otherwise know anything about that. Wouldn't have those pictures. So we give Marguerite Oswald credit for that. Spent the night, and then the guys came back, the 2 from Life magazine, with a translator this time, Russian speaker, and went off with Marina to try to see Lee, and that's what the picture is. They're getting ready to go into Dallas, and this is the morning, Saturday morning, the 23rd of November. And I expected she'd be coming back that night, but she didn't. and I didn't know why. And then Lee called from jail, from the police station, and wanted to talk to Marina, and I said, she's not here. Well, she should be there. You know, he was insulted that she wasn't there when he needed her. But I was curious about, just as he was, where she was. Well, Tommy Thompson was the writer from Life magazine, and I remembered his name, and he had told me what hotel they were staying in. So I called the hotel. May I speak to Tommy Thompson? And they rang the phone. Marguerite answered the phone. And I said, I wanted to talk to Marina. She said, no, you can't talk to Marina. Well, Lee wanted her to be available where he could talk to her and so on. Well, we can't be too concerned about what Lee thinks at this point. Hello, Mama Oswald. So, hung up. Lee called again later to ask me to reach a lawyer, but I was not able to. I had very mixed feelings. You know, he had a right to a lawyer, a right to a hearing, all of that. But I didn't appreciate his asking anything of me at that point. You know, I was not feeling very friendly. But I tried to reach the lawyer. He was out of town and didn't have an answering machine, so I didn't reach him. Well, there we are. I didn't know where Marina was, but she called me and asked if I could. She had left expecting she would come back also, but she said, I need clothes for the kids, I need some diapers, I need, stuff. And so I made up a package, and I began to get mail for her. Americans were very generous and very kind, and they several people sent a little bit of money, a donation. Please help out this young mother who was in such a terrible spot. So I'd if it was cash, I'd write a check for that amount and send it on to Marina, and all the clothes and stuff that she asked for. And hooray for the Irving Police Department. They had stationed an officer in front of the house. And I just took the package of what I wanted to send to Marina out to the officer and said, do you think you could get this to Marina Oswald? Yes, he could. So we did that several times, sending stuff. And one of the times that I sent things, I included a book that I thought would make her feel more at home. It was a book in Russian about child care and a little advice we had been reading about pinworms in this book. And they took it to her. And a few days later, I had a mysterious visit from two people from Secret Service. One was their Russian speaker, Mr. Gopadze, and I don't remember the name of the English speaker. Mr. Gopadze, I felt he wanted to check out my Russian, so he spoke only to me in Russian, and so I answered. And he showed me a little piece of paper, two pieces of paper, but I only looked at the top. He didn't really want me to read it, but I did see that it said, this is the key to our post office box, and that's about as far as I got. And Gopadze was saying, Mrs. Paine, you sent this to Marina Oswald. And I was saying, no, haven't seen it. Yes, you did. You sent it to her. Do you recognize the handwriting? No, don't recognize the handwriting. But I did comment that whoever wrote it didn't know the Russian word for key. He had transliterated in the Cyrillic letters key, and it said key. And so that identified that note for me, even though I only saw that first portion of it. And this is like the second bad moment after the one with the rifle. Because he was accusing me, and I was upset. So, of course, I turned to the English speaker, should have earlier, and said what was going on in the Russian language, that he was saying, Mrs. Paine, you sent this. And I was saying, no, I didn't. And finally the English speaker said, well, it was in a book. Oh, I sent a book. But of course I didn't know the note was in there. And I only figured it out from news reports later as to what the note was about or how it came about, because of the word key in the lead of the what you have here, this full story of the note, that it was something he'd left for Marina in April when he went out to try to shoot General Walker. And I asked much later, was there something else besides the note that pointed to Oswald as the one who made that shot? And Priscilla Johnson McMillan, who was a major researcher of the whole thing, said, yeah, he had photographs taken with his camera of the back of General Walker's house. He had notes that he'd made about his careful planning for the thing. He had figured out a place to hide the gun after using it. And he also figured he had bus schedule, how to get home on the bus. And it's just a lot of people don't know about this. I keep meeting people who didn't know that Oswald had made an attempt to kill somebody in April. Keep meeting them. Even the young man who recently interviewed me at the local paper said that's how he found out. When I told him, he didn't know. So it was pretty clear to me from my experience, my direct experience, that it was he, and that I think very important aspect, that he had tried to kill somebody and planned it. I do think that it's possible he didn't do much planning about shooting Kennedy. Because as I read his personality, if he had decided Thursday morning when he left his rooming house to go to work at the school book depository, I think if he decided that early, he would have taken his pistol with him from the rooming house. He went to work, talked to Buell, and came out that Thursday night, and then amazingly just walked out of a school book depository after the shooting. Where did he go? He went to his rooming house and got the pistol and used it terribly to kill Officer Tippit, and then was caught in the Texas school book depository, in the Texas theater a few minutes later. And the arresting officer reported, Officer McDonald, he had been trying to grab the gun, and it actually was fired. And he said that it hit him here rather than firing off the gun. He was saved by having his hand in the way of the pin firing the gun. Because Oswald was ready to kill that officer too. So those are the stories I personally have of my acquaintance with Lee and what happened and what, you're all we have time for questions. One of the questions that will always be there is what motivated him, why. But we're going to be stuck with that. We can't ask him, he never did have a trial.
I've gotten to be friendly with a woman named Carol Klopfer. She's the daughter of Ruth Klopfer, and you came to New Orleans. You sent them a letter. She wanted to know, I was just emailing her, and she wanted to get a sense from you of the whole story of how you kind of reached out to them and what happened when you showed up.
Yeah, well, I think this is when I first took her down in May to New Orleans. And I was worried about her being, not knowing anybody. And I didn't know anybody in New Orleans, so I talked to someone from the Quaker meeting, I think it was, to see if they could just bring somebody by to connect her with a Russian speaker and to see how she was doing. Have I answered your question?
Well, she was saying that her recollection was that her mother got a letter from you asking her to look out for Marina because you hadn't heard from her for a while.
Yeah. Oh,
she
yeah, that
couldn't
was a
remember if
follow-up.
this was July or August, but her mother didn't go there right away because she was waiting for the kids to come back from school. She wanted to go with somebody. And then what she said was Ruth got a call from you saying you were going to come and pick up Marina, and if you wanted to say hello to her, you needed to get there the next day. So that's her recollection of it from the experience. And then they went to visit her and Lee for a couple of hours. And then as they were leaving, you were driving up to pick up Marina. So she wants to kind of get your sense of whether the way she remembers
I
this.
don't remember overlapping at that time.
This would have been September, I think, probably.
Yeah, it would have been in September. Yeah, it probably did. I just don't know.
And then the last question she had was after when Lee was arrested and then there were FBI interviews, the FBI came to see them.
Right.
And she was curious because they never gave out the information. No one really knew. And she was wondering if it was part of I guess when you were talking with the FBI, did you mention that visit? And that's how they came to speak with Ruth and the kids.
Yeah, I probably didn't mention to the FBI that I had talked with her. Is that what you're saying? No.
Well, no, she was saying the only way they thought the FBI could find out about that they had been there because they had not said anything about their address to Marina or Lee or anything, that she was just wondering if maybe you had said something to the FBI about that brief meeting with Lee and Marina when Ruth and...
I don't think I did, but I don't know.
She was just... It was interesting to hear her perspective as a young kid or a college kid going and meeting, and her point was that I guess you had shown up at that point when they were leaving, and you had a chance to meet them. At least that's what she recalls. You don't recall that?
No, but that's I lose a lot.
Hello, my name is Anthony Spurgeon. I work as a tour guide for a company called Dallas Tour One, and most days I give tours of the Dealey Plaza. In fact, I was there this morning. I wanted to ask you if you are still in contact with Marina. When's the last time you spoke to her?
Oh, it's not since 64. I haven't been in touch, right? Yeah.
If she were to reach out to you, do you know what the...
I don't think it would. It didn't work for us. We did try to get together that next fall in 64, and it was just so sad. What had happened but the saddest thing that had happened to either of us. So we didn't really feel comfortable.
Of course, yeah. Well, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you so much for coming out also. It's a real honor.
Well, thank you all for coming. Look at this crowd. How about it? We fit rather well.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Pat Hall.
Pat Hall.
And I am the granddaughter of Gladys Johnson, who was Mr. Lee's landlady.
Oh, okay.
And I was wondering if you could clear up when Lee went to New Orleans and you took Marina down later when he called and said that he had a place. Then it was my understanding that you brought her back that same weekend because they started bickering.
Oh, no, it's two
So
trips.
you left her there.
It's 2 trips. I took her down in May
Okay.
when he called and said he had a place and a job.
Okay.
And then I stopped at the end of the summer in September
In September.
to visit. And that's when he was ready to go somewhere. And I said, well, if you want, I can take her to my house and get her into the hospital as needed. And
Okay. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah, good.
that I knew the secret.
we got some real fact checkers here. These guys are really alert.
Having studied and taught Texas history, do you think that history remembers Lee Oswald as the way that he was from how you knew him? So has he gone down in history as the person that you knew him as accurately, would you say?
I don't know. I would know, especially how history sees him. I think the killing the president was so massive an event and so important. I think that's really what people remember. That the House really portrays kind of how he was in a more relaxed setting, and how, I didn't see him as dangerous. I wouldn't have wanted him in my house if I'd known he was dangerous. So that part of him isn't very well known to history.
Mm-hmm. They tend to rewrite history books as time goes on, and I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In fact, it's one of the important factors that it didn't show on him. I mean, Marina knew that he had tried to kill somebody, but really his behavior generally didn't convey that to those around him.
Colvin Gibson from Irving.
Hi.
I had a question regarding what I thought I heard you say was someone named Margaret Oswald.
Marguerite, yes.
Marguerite Oswald. Was that Lee's mother?
Yes.
And she lived in the Metroplex?
She lived in Fort Worth.
Was there ever consideration for Lee and the family living with her?
Oh, he wouldn't even tell her there'd been a new baby. He wanted nothing to do with her.
Hi, Ruth. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Scott Wheeler. I live in Dallas. I've lived in Dallas 15 years. I've been in the Metroplex since I was 10, though.
What is the Metroplex? I don't know anything about it.
In Dallas, in Fort DFW, in the area. I lived in Arlington for 30 years.
The area.
Anyway, going on her comment about has history portrayed Lee as you knew him, made me think, a lot of people I think probably don't realize, from what I've gathered over the years, he had the capacity to be a very polite, businesslike person. From what I've also heard, he was a neat freak. He was a compulsively clean and neat.
Well, he's clean. I think he liked to have his potatoes cooked just so.
Yeah, he was very, and I've just gotten the feeling he's not at all what may have been conveyed by the photos of him after his arrest, for example, where he's dirty and disheveled and looks vicious. I mean, obviously, we're pretty sure he did a vicious thing, but that's not. He had the ability to convey a very neat, clean, polite person, and also I knew H. Lewis Nichols, who was the president of the Bar Association in Dallas in '63. And I knew him. I worked in building security in downtown Dallas back in the 90s. And he was, as an older man, he was an attorney in that building. And I asked him one day about it when I learned who he was, and I thought, I knew that man. So next time I saw him, I asked him about the visit he made to Lee in jail, asking him if he had counsel. And he told me we talked about it for about 10 minutes that afternoon, and he said he was very polite. He said if he didn't have the evidence, if he didn't know what was generally known as the evidence that they were mounting against him, that he would have never guessed that this man did what they said he did. He says he was very polite. He says, when I went into the cell with him, he says, of course, they lock you up in there with him. And he says, they locked the door, and I was in there, and I wasn't armed, and the only thing I knew was that I was bigger than he was. And he says, I was worried. He says, I was truly worried. What could this man be? But no, he was very nice, very polite. And he asked him if he needed an attorney, and he said no. He wanted him to contact Mr. Abt out of New York, who was known to represent communists. And he said that he said, if I need you, I'll contact you. I appreciate your help, and was just very nice. And so my thinking is that the Lee you probably knew was simply not at all.
I had no clue. Yeah.
Exactly.
And basically, I said that to the commission before I left. If we don't understand that an assassin can look perfectly fine, that look like a normal person, then we have no way of knowing. It's just we just don't understand how easy it is to kill the president.
Exactly. And also, one last comment, and I'll have a seat and let you comment if there is any comment. Did you know Robert Oswald, his brother, at all after the assassination? Had you ever had contact with him?
After the assassination, yes.
What was he like? I always got the feeling I liked him.
Well,
he was a very likable man.
Sensible guy in the family, yeah.
Marguerite, the mother, was a different story.
Well, she put him out to an orphanage early on. I think that was a savior thing for him. But I tried to talk with him when I was trying to figure out what was going on with Marina, because those weeks right after she left, I didn't know what was going on, whether she knew what her rights were, or And so I went to try to talk to Robert, and his wife talked to me through the screen door, but didn't want me to come in, so I left.
They weren't exactly very open.
They weren't very friendly. I think Robert took a bad impression of Michael. He just wasn't. What did he know? Who were these people?
Yeah, hi, I was just curious. Could you speak about Michael and his employment with Bell Helicopter, and just your thoughts on that? It seems like a odd place to work for a Unitarian, and I realize his stepfather invented the Bell Helicopter, so that he had that background. So I just hoping you could speak.
Well, that's exactly it. Michael was an engineer and very interested in aerodynamics, and he worked for his father-in-law in the barn where we were living. And this was the same barn where the Bell Helicopter had first been designed by Arthur Young, the father-in-law. And if Arthur recommended Michael, Bell would hire him, and did. And I think it was a really appropriate job for Michael. He loved the research and development aspect. You had to make parts for the designs that they were doing. So he was a machinist. I found that out when we went for a wedding, what do you call it, a license to marry? They ask you what your occupation is. He said he was a machinist. Oh, okay. Thank you.
There are several ways to learn more about all of this. Ruth Paine's home is now restored and features interactive exhibits. It is available to visit by appointment. Learn more and make reservations at City of Irving.